The name sounds familiar.
Good morning. It's time for us to begin our study here. We want to welcome everyone. It's good to have Fred back from Florida. He said he and Mark went gallivanting all over the place. He even got to go snorkeling down in the Keys. So, if you're tired of the weather already, well, you can slap Fred around a little bit. And we're missing a few other people today. Bob and Maggie are in Florida. And Gail Wheeler has, I think, a house full of company that she's babysitting. And also in our prayers today, I heard Vic telling us that Burdette was helping somebody move a tractor and kind of pulled something or popped something.
Yeah.
So they're not with us this morning. And also, Roseanne Kennedy had to go back to the hospital again yesterday by ambulance. And so she's at trouble. And I'm sure they're going to be trying to determine what else they can do or how they can get her feeling better, because she had her gallbladder out, and then there's one gallstone that's lodged somewhere that is causing chaos. And usually the procedure is to wait a week or 10 days, and then somebody like a doctor in the fall will go in with a scope and remove it. It's not usually that big of a deal, but hers has been very cantankerous, so I don't know what the outcome is going to be there, but we want to be in prayer about that. And also Shirley Davis, and she did tell us that she's been going daily. In fact, Dawn is probably getting ready to take her this morning to go at 10 o'clock. And she has to get an antibiotic infusion in her foot. And Sherry, this is not related to the cancer drug or anything like that. This is some kind of a ganglion problem. But anyway, they're not here today, but she did go to the doctor, and the doctor cleaned it up nice, and she felt better, and she said that she's just about done with the infusions, and she's hoping to be here Wednesday night. We'll wait and see on that. We also want to remember the Trent twins, Kalia and Caleb, in our prayers, and also Tony Rossi and many others in our newsletter. Let's all bow together. Stephen, you're leading singing this morning. Keith, would you lead us in a prayer? I'm having a little trouble with my throat.
I pray God and Lord, we come here today to worship you and honor you. We give you all the glory. And we thank you for this opportunity to be here. And we thank you for the many blessings that you bestowed upon us. Give us sick of our family and be according to your will. We pray for them and bring them back to the house so that we live with us. And Father, we ask for your blessings on us today, that our service to you will be pleasing to you. Thank you so much for your Son, who died upon the cross for us, and we trust you in prayer.
Amen. I think I'm dancing here in fracture. I want to preface this topic as I've done in the past, I think, if not, I should have, with some words of, I guess, caution or concern on the part of all of us. We want to talk today about what if we find ourselves in a position, and obviously our crowd is predominantly older here this morning, but we all have younger ones that are within our orbit of activities, whether it would be a child or a grandchild or someone that we love very, very dearly. So what happens if all of a sudden we're faced with an unexpected pregnancy? Do we really consider aborting the child? And here I want to preface this by saying that I always am very nervous about tackling this topic, not because I don't have very strong views on it, biblically speaking, but because I know that there are people who have been impacted by this in a negative way. And this is the kind of happening that oftentimes you don't confide in someone else. A lot of times it's done almost in total secret, or if somebody else is aware of your decision, it's almost a sworn to secrecy kind of a pact that you make. Please don't tell anybody. And I respect that greatly, and I would never seek to pry on anybody, but I also know that that means that oftentimes somebody goes through that and they don't seek counsel. A lot of times they don't even come in the aftermath of it all. They just want it all to go away in their minds, maybe. And I think we need to be compassionate towards that. Somehow we need to be able to talk about this topic, and maybe if there are any, and I'm not just talking about you being a young female who's just undergone an abortion. I'm talking about, again, within the realm of our life experience, we all know of somebody who's wrestled with this, maybe gone that route, or somebody who has thought about it and maybe backed away from it. So we need to be able to talk about this, but the goal is certainly not to make people that have been negatively impacted by maybe a poor decision or an uninformed decision to feel all the worse. I mean, that would be the last thing that we would want to do, is to try to exacerbate the heartache and pain that you feel. And I think that there are instances where women, and maybe boyfriends or husbands or whoever, that go together to make this decision, and then they regret it for all of their days. And to have to sit through a class where we bring it up, I know it has to be very painful. So that's not our goal, is to make you feel all the worse. But maybe if you could look at it this way, that what we're trying to do is help others to make a better decision so they don't have to suffer maybe in the ways that you did and feel the heartache and hurt. Let's open our Bibles to Exodus chapter 21. There's a reading here. Now, obviously, we all have a knowledge of the Ten Commandments. And which one of the Ten Commandments might relate in some way to the topic that we're talking about today? Which is also reiterated in the New Testament. An Old Testament Ten Commandment, but it also spoken again in Vic. You just said it?
Thou shalt not kill.
Yeah, thou shalt not kill. Now, some people that you read after say, oh, that doesn't apply to abortion in any way, because the killing that Jesus is talking about there, or that God was talking about in the giving of the commandments to Moses, was connoted a malice towards someone else. In other words, he's your enemy and you want him to die. And so the parallel is drawn. This baby, if you even would acknowledge it being that, I do, but you don't have an issue with this growth within your womb. It's not like it's malice to where you're going to. And I respect that interpretation. So I don't know that this passage about thou shalt not kill is maybe the best one to bring up in the discussion early on. But there is, the process of an abortion is a horrible, horrible thing. Even in the best case scenario, it's a horrible thing. And it's almost hard to not read into it some, I don't know that malice is the right word, but it's just a horrible undertaking. So maybe in some ways, thou shalt not kill is the umbrella scripture under which we talk about the topic of abortion. I've asked you to go to Exodus 21 because there's a discrepancy here. Many of you know that I use the New American Standard Version, and I would be interested to know how your translation reads this. Let's begin at verse 22. Exodus 21:22. If men struggle with each other, two guys fighting, and they strike a woman with a child so that she has a miscarriage, yet there is no further injury, he shall surely be fined as the woman's husband may demand of him. And he shall pay as the judges decide. But verse 23, but if there is any further injury, then you shall appoint as a penalty life for life. Now, if you read that right from the text of my translation, it uses the word, if a man strikes a woman who is pregnant and so that she has a miscarriage. Is that the way your translations read it? Say it again.
Premature.
So that she gives birth prematurely.
Yes.
Now there's a world of difference there. And you really need to look at that very carefully. And I think the context, verse 23, makes no sense if it's just a miscarriage. But if there is no further injury, in other words, it's saying, if a man strikes a woman who is pregnant and she delivers her infant early, but everything turns out okay, that's one issue. He's still done wrong and he needs to pay a penalty. But if there is further injury to where that baby or that mother perhaps dies from this, then there is this, what's known as the law of the tooth, the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. So a lot of people will appeal to this, strangely so, and use it as if to say this shows that abortion is okay, because the baby that's miscarried is not held on the same level as a human being. Otherwise, it would be eye for eye. But the translation here is correct. It's not that if she has a miscarriage, but if she delivers that baby prematurely. All right, any questions or comments there? All right, let's think some more here about this. When does life begin?
I think Psalm 139.
Read that for us, Vic.
Psalms 139, starting around verse 13. But thou dost form my inward parts. Thou dost weave me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are thy works, and my soul knows it very well.
Which talks about God managing the affairs of the womb, at least in a general sense. Do we, I wish Haley was here today because her field of expertise is in the natal world, the neonatal. And it used to be, the approach to this topic was, the key word was viability. In other words, it's okay to abort the child if it's done before the fetus is viable. And what does viable mean? Meaning that it can live on its own outside the womb. Generally speaking, would be the rule there, because you never know. But so it used to be, 7 months, 6 months, that if you were going to have an abortion, it couldn't be a late last trimester or last part of the pregnancy, because the fetus may be viable, and so it's got to be done early. Now, the laws of the land are not explicit on this all the time either, and there is great latitude taken with this, and under all of this is the footnote that if the mother's life is endangered, then there's no restrictions on when that baby can be aborted. And the problem with that is, it's not just a matter of physicality, that if this lady has this baby, this mother will die on the operating table. It can even be psychological. So if the mother's psyche is going to be affected in a negative way by this baby coming on the scene, then that gives justification to a doctor to go ahead and be involved in the abortion process. Now, let's clarify, if I've not stated the case as well as I should be. What I started to say when I brought up Haley was that nowadays, viability has, it's in the 5-month category, as opposed to the 6 months or 7 months, and it keeps moving all the time closer to the conception date, to where what used to be considered just a blob at 5 months a few years back, now doctors, they're rare cases, they're really preemies, but there are many more examples of where that 5-month-old fetus can be delivered and become viable, is viable from the day of its arrival, his or her arrival. So now what we have to struggle with is, what is infanticide? Let's talk just a little bit here, and delicately so, again, because it's a painful subject to even think about. What's the difference between infanticide and abortion?
This is the infanticide, killing of a baby who has been born.
Yeah. So, and there are places in the world where this happens, especially in the realm of sexuality. You want a male child, mom delivers a baby girl, not acceptable. Do away with the baby, whatever you have to do, just dispose of it. We're not having any more girls here. We need men in our workforce, not women. And I don't mean to be saying that in a chauvinistic way. I'm relating what's the view of some people in the world that way. So infanticide is when you take the life of a child that's already outside the womb, even. And this is a horrible thing to talk about. Or sometimes, just sometimes when an abortion is done late term, does the baby survive the abortion? Well, I don't mean to be laughing at that. It's an ugly sight. The doctor doesn't do precisely what he wanted to do. Maybe thankfully so at that point, but the baby survives what we might call a botched abortion. But then what happens seconds after the baby arrives? The child is snuffed out. And it just blurs the line between, and this makes us think, why is it okay, or why is it wrong in our country as a rule, and this is a pretty strong rule, you can't kill a baby once that boy or girl arrives outside the womb. But seconds before, or a couple of days before, if you choose to go in and take care of that life. I mean, is that not kind of a ridiculous argument to make?
Well, they don't think that they reframe the argument, and this is what happens. This is what happens when people want to get their way and they don't really care about the other. They reframe the argument, and the argument now isn't that it's a child. They refuse to view it as such. Now that's why we use the term fetus now. We don't call it a baby. You'd be hard pressed to get Pam Bachman or Sherry or myself to have referred to any of our unborn grandchildren as fetuses. But now that's what they call it. It's not a life. And if the other side was here arguing with you about this, and I'm certain I'm doing that, Terry, I'm just saying that that's how sin has gotten its way, is we reframe the argument and we appeal to everybody's ultimate selfishness when it comes to this. It used to be that abortion was something that girls did when they got in trouble, and so part of it was an economic thing. All the reasons why Roe v. Wade happened back in the early 70s is really worth taking a look at. But what's interesting, we talked about this last week, is that slope that we went down pretty fast, because now people have abortions just because it's inconvenient now for them to have a child. And so by reframing our language, same thing we did with homosexuality, by reframing our language now, we called it something different. And so we have a whole generation of people now who look at this and say, well, you guys just have it wrong. This isn't the life, this is just a fetus, and y'all need to get over it, and blah, blah, blah.
The extension of Jay's point there is, and I'm not, again, wanting to wade into politics today, but this shows what's happening here. You're not pro-abortion. That's too strong. And that sounds like death. But instead, what's the term?
Pro-choice.
You're pro-choice. And that sounds good, doesn't it? And so the argument is now shifted from whether or not the child in the womb is a real human being on its own, with its own, just leave it alone for a little while, and it grows to where it becomes a human being like all the rest of us. But now it becomes, it's a woman's issue. It's not a human rights issue. Somehow our society has turned this argument to where it's no longer, is it wrong to kill a baby in the womb? It becomes, is it wrong to inconvenient women who find themselves in this? Does not a woman have a right over her own body? Well, that has some absurdity to it, doesn't it? Because, well, I'll leave that alone for a minute, but Vic?
This is kind of a twist, but the government, because of Roe versus Wade, abortion is legal. And then all the arguments come into play about it being a fetus and unviable unit and the law, whatever you want to call it. But then if someone shoots a pregnant lady and both die, they're tried for murder of two people. So they have two ways.
Yeah.
It depends on how far along they are.
Yeah, but you also have what they deem late-term abortions. What that is one where it's in the vital stage, and then the baby is not allowed to be fully born. So then they can kill it because it's fully out.
So we've got all kind of language reinterpretation here. Sure, there's a legitimate term, fetus, and that's not a bad word. But how our society has changed on that subject, it was you wouldn't have to go too far back to when a young woman, or I guess a woman of any age, became pregnant. She is with child. You would never say, oh, she's with fetus. I mean, that sounds ridiculous. But now, even among the young people who used to be so easy to persuade that abortion is a logical, and I've got to stop here and say that I know that there's arguments to be made. I have a friend who's a school psychologist, and every once in a while we have a very serious discussion, and he is of the mind that he's dealing with a lot of kids that should have never come into the world. And some keep having one after another after another. There's no oversight in the household. You can imagine it's a horrible circumstance in many ways. And I'm not agreeing with my friend at all, and he's hesitant to even speak in that kind of language. But when you deal with in a situation like this on a regular basis, it gets to be pretty trying as to how you interpret that. But so a lot of young people that used to be, this is no big deal, now have swung back and are rethinking the topic of abortion. And how do you account for that? Anybody? What do you think's to the reason for that swing on the part of young people?
I think some of it is they're being better educated on what's in there.
Yeah. I think there's been so much now in the world of medicine where ultrasound has opened up a whole new view of the womb. And whereas you might be able to categorize it as just a blob down there, now when you see an ultrasound and you see that little human being beginning to take shape, and it changes everything that way. I think in some ways that's the same thing about smoking. You know, that some kids have had an education, a better education, and diet. You know, things that they eat. The kids today are amazing. Josh watches what he eats in ways that when I was his age, I would have never given him a thought. And that's a good thing. Comments or questions while I pause here? I want to ask one more in the last couple of minutes. Sean, is your hand up? What would justify an abortion if we find ourselves at this intersection where something happens and it's unexpected, it's not planned for, and a lot of times panic sets in, and that's what causes us to make this decision rather than to go another route. But what is it then that would cause us to have an abortion? And I hope that it's not simply an unexpected pregnancy. Now, when I say simply, I don't mean to paint the picture that that's not a serious thing. That's the result, oftentimes, if somebody's not married, of fornication, and that's a serious violation of the will of God. And in fact, sometimes that has been the response on the part of the parents to the young daughter that is now pregnant. And it's hard to face, all of a sudden a public viewing that my daughter has committed fornication. She's expecting a child out of wedlock. So one of the panicked responses, let's do away with this problem. People don't even have to know you have this problem. So the rush is made, and then it compounds the decision, or the problem of fornication now becomes compounded by all kind of repercussions from the abortion. Not only the taking of an innocent life, but the haunting fears and regrets that may come with that decision. So what is it that might cause us to, and I'm using the word justify, What could cause somebody to justify an abortion?
How about nothing? How about nothing, Derek?
All right, let me play devil's advocate. What if you find out that, and here's one that's becoming, we're an older group and maybe we don't realize this, but do you know that more and more and more abortion is used as a sex selection for the child? You're trying to have a girl, you're trying to have a boy, and you're not getting the result you want, so just abort and go and try again. And that is not justification to me for aborting a child at all. What about this one? You find out that that child is severely diseased, the doctor tells you that the child is not going to live outside the womb. This happened with David Brazel's sister, Rebecca, their first child. Late in the pregnancy, I don't remember when it was, maybe some of you can help me. Maybe it was around the 5 or 6 months, but the doctor told Rebecca and her husband, this child is not going to live. If it does, it'll just be for a little while, and then so they were recommending let's abort the child.
Well, there's two things about that. First of all, they're not always right.
Right.
Many a parent has been told that their child, there is something wrong with them, and the child is born, and if there is something wrong, it can be repaired, or there's nothing wrong. That happened at Cortland Road twice. Two of my sisters at Cortland Road. The other thing is, we have our dear friends who live in San Diego. They had a child born with cerebral palsy. The child was born with an APGAR score of 0. Those of you who are supposed to get a 10, this lady got a 0. She had a life expectancy of 12 years. She lived for 25. And who are we to say that that child should have been terminated? When we put ourselves in the position of playing God, that's not a position I want to be in, because that's what you're saying. Now you're going to decide in vitro who should live and who shouldn't. And that is something I don't want any doctor, any insurance company, any government telling any of us that we have to do. And that's why I say nothing. The other one that people always say, of course, is rape. The girl is raped and she gets pregnant and she wants to abort the child. And whereas I can be terribly heartstricken, we are now killing an innocent party in this country. And there are plenty of people, there are millions of people who will adopt those children.
The other one is, my wife is carrying that child, and the doctor says if your wife goes through this pregnancy, she will die on the table. Now, all of these things have changed so rapidly in our advanced medical world to where we have to rethink all of these. Even this is the big one to me, because there's even though I just made the argument, if you just leave that fetus alone, it's going to grow and become a human being. But if you know that your wife is only 30 and she's doing fine, but we don't know for sure about the baby in the womb, but we know that if your wife tries to have this baby, she's going to die. That's the really difficult one. But even that has changed.
They don't know that.
Well, they don't, Jay. That's right. And so all of this brings in an element of, do we take on the role of God in, and this was Rebecca's decision and her husband, and how difficult it must have been to go those last few months, knowing that you were basically carrying a dead child, or at least that's what the doctors told you. And in their case, it ended up being just about just what the doctor said. But they preferred to let, as we would say, let nature take its course. And rather than intervene and intercept what might happen on its own, they chose to let it happen in a natural way, rather than to reciprocate that death of a child by abortion. So back to the question then, what if it's not rape or incest, or if it's not deformity? One of the big arguments here is made by a lot of people that are not so much in the know, is they think that if this family has another child, it's just going to be another abused child. Because these are not legitimate parents in the sense that they're not really conscientious of raising this child. But strangely enough, that we can just throw that stat out the window, because 90% of all abused children they're the result of a planned pregnancy. And some of you can vouch for that. Not 90% of children, in other words, you don't have to be a bad parent. You know what I'm trying to say. Children come from good parents, but then come to be abused because big comment.
Well, I don't really go with that scenario, but if it would happen, you say, well, these two parents would definitely abuse this kid, just take the kid off.
Yeah.
Why should the kid lose his life over the parents?
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about the world of adoption here, have we? Where there are so many couples out there that are wanting to have kids, that can't have kids, that are standing in line and even willing to shell out big bucks to wrap their arms around a young baby that maybe you would be inclined to abort. Phyllis, last word today.
A lot of mothers have babies. Oh, I have a baby. It's so cute. And that is 2 years old. They're hard to adopt out. Nobody wants a 2-year-old. Want a baby who's hard. By the time the child's 2, 3 years old, they've got their own personality.
And what's your argument there?
My argument is that if they would love that these parents that have that, these mothers have them, if they're, especially, if they don't want them when they're older. They want them when they're cute and cuddly.
So maybe they should
to adoption then.
be encouraged to think about putting the child for adoption early with the benefit of the child. Next week, we've got 2 more sessions in this, and then we're going to shift gears with a new study that Bob Phillips is going to lead us in on Sunday morning. But I want us to think about this. Not only how we feel about it, but in the changing environment of our world. Does the love of God conflict with the holiness of God? And all I'm trying to get us to think about here is more and more and more we're hearing of people who think that there's no way that somebody's going to be lost because God is a great God of love. So don't tell me that this God of love is going to punish somebody for not obeying the gospel or for living an immoral life. Okay, that's what we'll talk about next week. Thank you.